can start our panel on small businesses and giant players in following and implementing the SDGs. My name is Marietta Jager. I'm a DDG in DigiDevco, and I'm very honored and pleased to be invited to moderate this session. And of course, it's an honor to be on the stage with such a prominent speakers as we have here today. And of course, I will introduce them one by one when they will speak. But of course, here it's a pleasure to welcome Professor Jeffrey Sachs. It's a pleasure to welcome Vivanu Gvasanou. It's a pleasure to welcome Felix Bikpo and Tazam Ava, Professor Yunus, and of course, my dearest friend, Barbara Montero, Director of the UNDP office in Brussels. This will be a very interactive session, and I will explain how it will work later. I would just like to say 2 words on the behalf of the European Commission. First, I would like to praise the excellent cooperation we have with the UNDP. We have a long-standing partnership, and we even decided to use one of the projects that we are doing together, especially when it comes to the development of minerals. This is the ACP EU program in the EDF that we are implementing, and the signature will be done today via the UNDP. And therefore, I would like to say that the role of the private sector, and especially of the small businesses, is essential to achieve the SDGs. We believe in the European Commission that the traditional development financing tool will not do the trick, and we will not achieve the 17 goals only and alone with the development tools and assistance that we do now, but we need to crowd in the private sector. We need to find innovative ways of financing. We need to do blending, leverage, technical assistance, capacity building. We need to have a more, I would say, first and third and second and third pillar of so-called European investment plan that we are putting in place now in order, to crowd in private business and to help the SMEs to do the business. So the name of the game that I would like to leave with you is to scale. We need to scale together with the private business, and we need to implement the SMEs in the value chains. We also need to do the sustainable business that you all know, that basically inclusive sustainable development is a profitable business. We just need to convince our, I would say, international financial institutions that they need to change their perspective from the short-term profit to the long-term perspective. And how we are going to do that, it's the question, it's a I would say, 1,000 million question that I will ask today also my speakers. And I would say that with these words, I would like to start the debate. So first of all, I need to tell you that this is a very interactive session, and you are encouraged to think of questions for our panelists and send them via the EDD app. To do this via your iPhone, so please don't be shy. Take out your iPhones and think about the most intelligent questions that you can ask. And you need to select the interactive tools, question and answers, and the room number A3. This means auditorium 3. So with this kind of technical announcement, I think we are ready for the panel. And my first speaker will be Professor Jeffrey Sachs. I don't think you need the introduction because you are such a famous figure, not only the Sustainable Development Goal advocate and world professor of economics of Columbia University, not to mention that you were named twice by Time magazine as a 100th most influential world leader. So having said that, my first question would be, what is the potential of small businesses to contribute to achieving the SDGs? And Second one, having in mind that you've been very much involved also in the MDGs, and you've been assisting to Kofi Annan and also the Ban Ki-moon in implementing that. How big a role did the small business play in MDG agenda? So thank you very much for starting the debate.
Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here and sitting next to people with Muhammad Yunus on my left, who have started more businesses than I know I can even count. I'm going to leave reality to him and start with some macroeconomics just to give us a little bit of an overview, but I'm sure we're going to hear, and I'm going to learn a lot from the panel, so I'm delighted to be here. Small business has a very important role to play in the SDGs, but so does medium business and so does large business. So I want to start us off by making a point, which is that we shouldn't be ideological, in my opinion, about small, medium, and large. We should understand that the size distribution of businesses is like the size distribution of cities or the size distribution of many other phenomena in society, which reflects underlying forces of the market economy. There are reasons for small business and there are reasons for large business. And what we have is a kind of ecosystem, if you want to call it that, where there is a pattern. The vast majority of enterprises, if you count them as one by one, will be very small businesses in any country. In Europe or the United States or Africa or any place else, 90+% of businesses will be small businesses. But in terms of employment will be roughly a third in most places between small, medium, and large enterprises, depending on exact definitions and where you draw the line. And it's impressive that these patterns replicate over time and across countries. There are deeper reasons for them. And the same is true, by the way, if you look at the size distribution of cities in any country over time. It's been noted for 75 years that there is a pattern of city size distribution that often follows what's called Zipf's law, which is uncannily reflected in country after country and replicated over time. All of this is to say, don't set your heart on one kind of enterprise being the essence of development or the essence of solutions or the source of employment or the location of value-added creation. Their small and large businesses will coexist, and they will mutually exist where large businesses operate together with small suppliers, customers, and so forth in an ecosystem of size distribution. A second obvious point is that the role of small business differs across sectors. Some sectors, by nature of technology, are inherently large companies because there are big economies of scale. Utilities companies, major industrial firms in heavy industry are large, typically because there are significant technological economies of scale. Whereas in wholesale and retail trade, you may have a vast proportion of employment as well as number of firms in small and medium enterprises. Of course, with technological change, boundaries and the nature of increasing returns to scale will change. When new technologies come, it's possible that what used to be large scale can become small scale. So when we make the transition from coal-fired power plants to photovoltaics, we are likely to be making a transition from large companies to a large number of small companies. And so this is also part of the nature of technological change. we should talk about, obviously, specifics of small enterprises. They have their own nature by definition of being small. They can't internalize a lot of risk. They can't bear social burdens very much. They can't self-insure their workers in a way a large enterprise can do. And so small enterprises have intrinsic features that make them different from large and also suggest public policies that I think are important. For example, in the United States, a lot of healthcare is essentially financed at the firm level. This is not a very good model. It's a model that the U.S. stumbled into for a number of reasons in the 1940s particularly. But a better model is public financing of education, of healthcare, rather than firm-based financing. And so a lot of what makes firms thrive or not thrive depends not only on their size and their sector, but on the broader policy environment around them. And I personally believe we should be continuing to focus on primarily public financing of health, primarily public financing of education, primarily public financing of infrastructure, despite all of the rhetoric around us of privatization. Most of that rhetoric is coming from private financial markets that don't really pay too much attention about poor people or about universal coverage. And so a lot of the rhetoric about the privatization of services, in my view, is misplaced and is often America-based. And the fact of America is that lots of people are excluded from basic services in the United States, and that's because they've been privatized to an important extent. But from the point of view of our topic of small and medium enterprise, I think the socialization of responsibility for health, education, and other phenomena leaves the small firms to be able to do what they do, which is the particular economic niche without having to fund the health care or the social security of their workers. Of course, small firms often in poor countries have a question of formalization. Are they legally registered? Are they paying taxes? What are the benefits of doing so? In general, formalization, in my view, is important. Creating a legal framework is important. The information revolution that we're enjoying makes it possible to do this because now information costs have fallen so sharply that small companies can be part of the information system of good governance in ways that were not possible before. Small companies have distinct challenges of financing. And sitting next to Muhammad Yunus, I shouldn't even say more, but he's going to talk about that. He invented microfinance because very, very small business people who, A, didn't know they were business people or that they were entrepreneurs until he told them, had no mechanism of finance. So you had to invent a new kind of finance. That kind of invention of financing is ongoing because technology is our friend in this, in my view. And financial inclusion becomes easier and easier in an online era, in my understanding. But I'm, again, going to defer to the real experts that are on this panel. There's another feature about small companies that is not so much about small companies, but about one type of small company that I think is very important, and that is startup companies. You mention them in the same context because inherently, almost inherently, startups are small. It's hard to start large. So there are special issues of startups that are important, which is that there is that valley of tears in any startup of anything we do in life, which is surviving until you get on your feet. And that raises lots of questions about the organization of startups. I mention startups not only because they're a general economic phenomenon, but they're essential to the success of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because to achieve sustainable development, we need lots of innovation and lots of companies doing things that they weren't doing before. And so we need startups inherently for taking on new challenges. But starting up is hard. Most startups fail, of course. And a lot of institutional innovation is about how to address startup needs. I think one of the great developments in the US business systems 50 years ago onward was venture capital, which was a distinct form of industrial organization for high-tech startups. I think it's proven its worth. Very few places in the world have venture capital to speak of. Venture capital is not only lending to a high-tech company, but it's a special way of organizing management and oversight of that lending so that you can pool resources into highly risky but highly innovative companies. We should talk about creating venture capital or quasi-venture capital even in low-income settings. What is the best way to do that? And finally, I want to come back to the idea that changing technology by itself changes the size distribution of firms. We know from economic history that very large enterprises really came to be a major part of the economy at the end of the 19th century because of technological changes. A lot of heavy industrialization came because of the Industrial Revolution and the capacity to benefit from massive economies of scale at a technological level. Probably our technological change now is working in the other direction. It's creating networks rather than giant firms. It's lowering transactions costs and probably making it likely that small enterprises can flourish in a way that was not possible before if they're information-based rather than heavy industrial-based. So maybe we'll see a kind of flowering of small enterprises made possible by information technology, and I want to put that on the table as well. So those are just some points that I think we ought to discuss, and I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. It's always very inspiring to listen to you, but I will still provoke you with a question. Were the SDGs crafted with the small businesses in mind?
Were the SDGs drafted with small business in mind? If you read the Agenda 2030, small business is mentioned, certainly. Of course, small businesses are on people's minds because they're an important part of the economy. But I don't think that the SDGs were primarily drafted for that reason. I think the SDGs were primarily drafted for the purpose of integrating a desperate need for getting climate change under control and environmental damage under control, together with the imperatives of health and education and the ideas of job creation for the vast population of young people in the world. That's the real motive of the SDGs, is that we've got a very complicated, integrated agenda that has to link social, economic, and environmental considerations. And the SDGs play a role in that. For some people, maybe the preeminent role. But my view is start with the problem we're trying to solve and then work backward to what are potential solutions, of which small and medium enterprises are certainly part of the solution space.
Thank you very much. I fully agree that small and medium enterprises are the part of the solution. The question is also how can we integrate the SDGs into their DNA and into their, business model. And the question how, we ask 4 women from Uganda, Guyana, Fiji, and Jamaica. I would like to show you a short video to see how the small businesses can contribute in changing lives of women in the development world. So please, let's play the video.
Hi, my name is Sharmila, and this is my business. I do extracting of sand. The business name is Natakala Dredging.
David Josephine, I'm an artisan, woman miner in Busia United Mining Association.
I am Michelle Shaw from Shaw's Quarry. I am a licensed quarry operator in the Cane River Quarry Zone outside of Kingston, Jamaica.
My name is Dusu Nabil. I'm an entrepreneur. As a construction company, we have to go to the quarries. We have to buy those minerals, development minerals like sand, stone.
I'm doing this extraction for last 13 years. Right now, I'm thinking of expanding my business. My vision is to have a block plant and have nice, good trucks to deliver customers and employ people.
We do mining of gravel and coarse stones. These stones are bought from the West Rock.
We do all grades construction, aggregates, we do materials for block making, we do boulders, we do materials to be used for wall packing, etc.
My vision is to grow, to help people grow too. Because when I grow, the people with me grow.
Membership in our Busia United is 43. We have 20 women and we have 23 male. My dreams for this association, one of them is to see growth. We need actually to have the community growth in the whole community at large. I also have a dream of actually empowering the women. Just like when you're checking these sites, we are seeing the majority are the women who are actually suffering, scratching, doing the hard work to ensure the families survive. Because a lot of burden has been left to these women. All the time they are here from morning to sunset to ensure they fend for their families. Now, little do these women know that they have the power potential in them. So if we sensitize them and they actually come to realize the power lies in their hands, they have the potential, it's women who can actually change our community.
And then you borrow money from the bank, you get loan. When you get loan, it's certain, like you have to pay interest. And then you go, when you get loan, you go to those quarries, buy the materials from there, and then come and then work. The one who gave you the contract did not give you like the money early, and then the bank is taking interest where the interest rate is really high. Sometimes it's like you lose.
We would definitely need business intelligence. We would need information about the supply and demand. We would need technical data, and we would most definitely need better access to trade financing.
Give us some small funding and we transform our communities. I'm so grateful.
Thank you very much. I hope the video gave you a lot of thoughts and basically you will ask a lot of questions later on. But now I'm turning to our old friend, the Assistant Secretary General of African and Caribbean and Pacific Group of States, Vivanu Gwasanu, and he is an expert in sustainable economic development. I mentioned before, we do together the ACP EU development mineral programs, and now you have seen also how that can contribute to the lives of women across the world. But I would like to ask you a question, and if you can please describe the importance of supporting the private sector, and especially when it comes to young people and women. I would also like to ask you to tell us what ACP has done in order to tailor-made your approach towards the small businesses, and especially in the various sectors like the agriculture and mining. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Marietta. And well, it's a full program that you're putting before me. I don't know if it's any difficulty if I can express myself in French. Is it translation available?
Non, on peut parler en français, pas de problème.
Yes, you can speak French. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you. And it's true that this is an exercise that we are undertaking together with the European Union and the ACP. Now, what Mr. Jeffrey Sachs said about the global context is very important. This is something that gives us an idea of the reality that we live in, the reality that we trade in. This video that we just watched are first-hand accounts from this program that we have launched together, ACP EU Development Mineral Program. Now, we have seen that today we have to change the lives of our people, and if we want to contribute to the achieving of the SDGs, we can only do it if we address real needs. And these real needs are at the level of micro and small enterprises. Now, we're talking about small businesses, giant players. This is something that we've talked about with our Korean colleagues as well, but we talked about small players and big business. So these are individuals who undertake small actions, but these small actions lead to very big results. Statistics tell us today, especially in terms of Africa, is that when we look at the job market, every year we receive between 11 and 12 million new people who enter the labor market. The African market, nonetheless, can create employment for 3 to 4 million people per year. So therefore, you have about 8 to 9 million young people who are looking for jobs. This is in addition to the approximately 80 million people who are already on the labor market. So if we can't find a solution in this context, then failure is the only possible solution, is the only possible outcome. But we know that there are limits to job creation at governmental level. So the only solution that we have really is to encourage entrepreneurship and small companies. The program that we have developed together with the private sector, this is something that takes on board the diversity of the ACP countries. So we have small island nations, and you also have large companies. You have countries in the Pacific, in the Caribbean. We have landlocked countries. We have large countries like Nigeria. So how can we find solutions for all of these different countries? But the reality is the same everywhere. The economy on small islands, for example, is based on tourism. Majority of the products consumed in the tourism sector are imported. If we look at minerals and what they contribute to development, there we talk about sand, for example. When we're talking about construction in the Middle East, they use sand, but that sand doesn't come from the Middle Eastern deserts, but in fact, that comes from Africa. That comes from other places where it is transformed. Thereafter, when we're talking about the construction sector, we have to take that into account in our development plans as well, so that we can actually use it to transform our realities. So what we need to do, first off, is tap into the knowledge in the market. Where is the development taking place and how can we contribute to it? Also, this program that we have with the European Union, we have invested about 17 to 20% of our funding in the private sector. Now, why are we doing that? We are looking at how a mechanism can be put in place to finance micro enterprises. The solution that we have found is that we need to focus on agro-business. We also need to focus on the development of added value to the mineral sector. Furthermore, the informal sector is very important in this context. So we have to find a solution where we're protecting workers in the formal sector, but we also have decent working conditions for those in the informal sector, and furthermore, facilitating the access to finance. Now, all of this work is done not necessarily to formalize everything, because we would lose a degree of dynamism there. But what we're trying to do here is to take bankers to understand companies, informal agricultural enterprises as well. Because one thing is clear, we need funding for agriculture. But when you talk to funding providers, you realize that these funding providers don't understand the agricultural businesses. So they need to understand the reality on the ground, and furthermore, they need to also understand the interest in investing here. There is a degree of risk, of course, but there's no understanding really as to why this has to be so. So I think we also need a system where we are educating businesses, where we're educating funding providers towards these micro enterprises. And furthermore, we also want to provide accompaniment and counseling to micro entrepreneurs so that they can also reach the funding outlets that do exist. So this is what we're doing. We're focusing on agro businesses and the agricultural sector, because that's where 70 to 80% of our populations in our region actually work. It's the activity of the rural sector, and in this way they can find decent employment and accompaniment in their activities. Thank you.
Right, therefore I have some work for you to do, and we will ask you a question, and you will see the questions on the screen, and we will do the poll on what do you think the small businesses need to thrive. So please, can you show the questions and the answers that we would like you to, can you see it? And you can vote, please. We will do it very quickly because we have a delay, and therefore I would give you 2 minutes to give the right answer. 1, 2, 3. Do we have the results?
I think the line is still...
The line is still there.
Okay, there we go.
Exactly. So let me see the results. I would say that we have exactly the same results as we got on the Twitter, because we put the same question on the Twitter, and I see that the result here is even bigger than on Twitter. It's now 33.8% that we need training and technology, and on Twitter we got 34% that we need the training and technology. So we cannot say that we disagree with the other public that we have asked the same question. And now the same question here, like what do you think we need to do for the small business to thrive? I will ask Felix Bigpaw, the Chief Officer of the African Guarantee Fund. He has 20 years of experience in banking and finance sector, and I would like additionally to ask you, what is the importance of finance, and what are, in your view, the main barriers to finance really the large, and how to finance open up to the small businesses? And I would like you to give us the recipe how we can basically bridge this short and long-term nature of financing for the sustainable development in order to have a very tangible result. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation first, and it's always a pleasure to be in such a panel because it gives us the opportunity to discuss for me the most important problems that, as far as I'm concerned in Africa, is our problem, is how to get out of poverty. If you look at in Africa, you will see that in the world, in fact, Professor Jeffrey Charles will be okay with me, that today the world economic growth is being led by the SME business. But if you go to Africa, that's not the case. The growth in Africa is not led by the SME business. Why? Because this population of enterprise are facing serious challenges. And if you look at the economic history, you can put them in 4 categories. And we saw it here. The most important one is quality of infrastructure and the level of infrastructure in the continent. The second one, and we can see it also, is access to the market. And my colleague here will maybe develop this aspect later in Bangladesh. The fourth one is the business environment. In this continent, when I talk about business environment, it's more the legal and judicial environment than any other things. And the last one, that's why I think you invited me, and for me is the most important one, access to finance. The top 3 ones are being dealt by the government and you people here, the development partners I can call you, doing well with PP, find some project and make sure that this is happening. And some countries in Africa are doing very well. Where there is an issue is access to finance. If you look at, some people are saying that the financing gap for the SME in Africa is above $155 billion. So far, this financing gap was fed by the public sector resources. We know what's happening in the world now. These resources are shrinking and shrinking. And this gap is increasing exponentially. What are we doing? We need to find a solution. It's going back to look to see if we can find some money in the private sector. And in the continent, the main source of financing is the banking sector. So what can we do to be able to take this banking sector money and send it to the SME? The bankers will tell you that the SME has a high perceived risk, will tell you that we don't have enough resources to be able to face their demand. Their needs are more or less how to have long-term resources to finance the long-term needs, to improve their capacity. They'll tell you, we want to lend money to SMEs, but the owner of SME don't have the capacity, the skills to know how to use efficiently this money. And they'll tell you also, yes, most of the time when you come to see them, there's some very beautiful projects, as we saw here. Total of cost is 100, we have only 1 in equity. There is no bank in the world that will give you 99 to 1. So how can you find a system that can help us to really put all of that together and tackle and give a comfort to the banking system to work? That's what we're doing in African Guarantee Fund. We believe that, and to answer to a question, creating this type of what you call innovative financial institution that can take the money, the resources from the private sector, leverage this money, create an acceptable environment to provide the comfort that the financial system needs, we'll be able to together to reduce the perceived risk with low money. We don't have enough money. The money exists in the private sector, how to get it. That's what we're trying to do today. But as my colleagues say here, it's not just a question of money. It's also a question of capacity building. I said, I want to give you my money, but I want to make sure that you know how to use it. So we need to build the capacity of this SME owner. Capacity is not just for training. I saw it here. It's not just for technology. It's also for system. It's also for the environment that we need to build to create an environment that gives me the comfort that we want. Capacity also for the banking system. All the banks in Africa, most of them, sorry if you are here, I'm part of them, they don't understand how to assess the SME risk. They don't understand how to assess the micro business risk. In that case, we will never give you any credit, any facility. So it's important for us to create the tools that can help the bankers or the other financier to understand this type of businesses and reduce the perceived risk. I think this is the way for us to work together to be able to help the private sector have your money come and to reduce the kind of gap I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You raised even more questions, I would say, but they are all very relevant. So the question of access to finance, basically you reminded us that there are 230 trillion of private assets, so that the money is there, that we need to find how to use it and to attract the investments, and also how to do the capacity when it comes to the SMEs. So I hope we will get even more questions from the audience later on. But the question, access to finance and how to direct access to international market and be done, and how can that change the life of women across the developing countries, is a question I would like to ask a very young lady, but a very, very bright and accomplished young leader that comes from Bangladesh. And Tanzim Ava is really an inspiring young lady that should be a role model to many of the young people around the world. So here it's the question for you. How do you find the access to finance? How do you do it? And how we can basically use that also for the empowerment of women in order to start their businesses? And can you give us the example of how you did your startup and the Synergy Global, and what kind of advices you can give to the audience and other young people around? Thank you.
I would like to share my story that actually drove me into founding up my startup. So I grew up in the global south, in a developing country, Bangladesh. And growing up, I have seen how marginalized people, millions of them, work in indecent working conditions in private sector firms to earn $2 against 16 hours a day of work. And because for these people, losing their jobs is more fearful than losing their lives. Because for them, inclusion in the formal market is a very big issue. And for the major European and American fashion brands, they are actually not human beings. They are cheap labor. And let me tell you, there are 3.2 million of this cheap labor working in 5,000 different factories in my country. And there are 1.2 billion of them scattered in different corners of the world. And they work for countless hours for criminally low wage, just to make sure that the trendiest clothes are available in stores within 5 days of placing the order by the fast fashion brands. What inspired me particularly is one of those 5,000 factories in my country was Rana Plaza. And Rana Plaza had over 3,600 employees working in the disastrously broken infrastructure because they were threatened by their employers that they will be kicked out of their jobs. On 24th April 2013, Rana Plaza collapsed along with 1,134 cheap labor. And it's been 3 years, but I still feel like these people did not die simply because of the cracked walls. It's also because, their lives had lost value simply because they were trapped in the informal economy without any dignity, any inclusion, any access to finance, any independence of choices. So that incident actually moved me to think that, why these people are trapped in the informal economy? What should be how should we fill this gap? And it also raised a question to myself that what are the job practices of the factories that practice this modern day slavery? And then last year I got to meet one of the victims of Rana Plaza who was still working in a factory to sustain her $4 a day living. And when I met her, I tried to encourage her to utilize her skills and experience to be an entrepreneur, because that could potentially give her a better income and also a safer life. But then I got to know a different story through her eyes. And that was the story of invisibility. Her name is Halima, and she said that I'm too invisible to my employers, to the clients, to the world at large. No one knows about us. And then that made me ponder that if these underprivileged yet highly skilled people could gain access to the formal market, they could potentially generate a greater income and endless opportunities. So that's where my startup, social startup, synergyglobal.co's online platform comes in. Because through our platform, we make this invisible people like Halima visible by giving them a global identity in the realm of internet. Through our platform, we try to connect these marginalized seamstresses and tailors living in the slums of Dhaka with the global market of ethical fashion. Ethical fashion brands can submit their designs, our entrepreneurs work on them, and we ship it back. But most importantly, what my startup does is they bring these entrepreneurs, this marginalized cheap labor out of the indecent working conditions and give them the independence, the empowerment. It gives them the authority to make choices about their income, their earning opportunities, their contribution. And I realized that maybe my startup is a very small player in the private sector, but it's an honor for me to quantify the impact of my startup by bringing in freedom and independence to the marginalized people, by giving them inclusion, and also by being part of the growing revolution for ethical fashion. And now that millennials are spending $48.5 billion in ethical fashion as I speak, this is evidence that we have the power to make greater impact. If I want to conclude, I would like to say that, if we consider development as a puzzle, we all are scattered little pieces of that puzzle, and we all have a role to play. So, those of us who have the power to make choices, we have to make choices for those who do not have that power. And that is 1.2 billion of people in the world. And I completely acknowledge that how difficult it is for the large-scale private sectors to maintain the perfection of their value chain and the actors therein. But it's also important to ask ourselves that despite having private sector interventions, why we still have people around us who live under $4 a day? That's because private sector is creating jobs, but they're not creating inclusive or decent jobs. They're not addressing the sustainable development goals. So my recommendation is the private sector should stand on two pillars, the sustainable development goals and also the promotion of ethical consumption. And we need to realize that labor is never cheap. The value that we pay to this hardworking labor is very cheap. And from the consumer perspective, I know that it might seem like investing in ethical fashion is a luxury, but if I recall the incident of Rana Plaza, I think I am equally responsible for that incident, because when we consumers throw away the labels with cheap price tags written made in Bangladesh, we never actually ask ourselves that who made our clothes so cheap? To what expense in return? Was it a seamstress starving half a day? Was it her life? So as smart global citizens, we need to ask ourselves these questions. I really appreciate how the EU Consensus on Development and the Addis Ababa Agenda, they appraise private sectors to include SDGs in the course of making profits. And I believe that it's time we commit. It's time we commit to be more responsible as citizens. It's time we commit to ourselves, to the underprivileged, to empower them, to the SDG 2030 agenda. Because it's us, when we, the scattered little pieces of that puzzle, come together, empower the underprivileged, take the right roles, that's when we get to solve the development puzzle and we have a better and developed world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for reminding us all that not a little bit longer than a month ago, we celebrated the 4th anniversary of Rana Plaza. Since then, a lot has changed. Unfortunately, this tragic event reminds us about, the work we still need to do when it comes to decent work, child labor, etc., etc. So I would like to remind you that since then we have done the government initiative in the EU, and a lot of not only resources, but I would say priorities had been put into the decent work, women empowerment, access to finance, but also the traceability of the value chain, because this is the main issue. And there are a lot of companies, I would say, that they know what kind of dirty work, they get involved to with the not formalized contracts, but still there are 40% of illegal subcontractors that you will never find. So of course your call is also I would say, appel to us that we all work with our companies even more in order to make another 50% of the fashion industry much, much, much more aware of what's going on. And of course, this is something to remind us all here as well. But now, having said that, I will turn to the man who was basically called the creator of a new financing, and who received in 2006 a Nobel Prize for the poverty alleviation work and empowerment of poor women. So here I'm turning to you, Professor Muhammad Yunus. Sorry, of course, I have a huge headache today, and I do apologize for all the misspelling I have done today, but I'm still trying to be the best moderator that you can have at this panel. So I would like you to describe the human-centered approach to microfinance and the current state of art. And also I would like to ask you to try to answer a couple of questions that we already put to the audience and to the speakers today about the access to finance, how to bridge the difference from the short and long-term nature of financing. And the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Is it working? Hello? No, microphone is not working.
It's working.
Now it's working. Thank you very much. Thank you. First, I wanted to congratulate Tasneem for raising these issues here in a forum like this. One piece of information I would like to add to what she said you are buying these cheap clothes from Bangladesh. Probably you bought it for $50. But you don't remember, probably you don't find out how much that we sold it for. Bangladesh factory sold it for. It sold it for $5. And you paid $50. So if that $50 could, a simple sharing of that $50 additional money could be passed on to the workers, their life will be completely different. So this is where the gap is, where the missing part of the whole thing. Let me proceed with the issue that you raised. The finance has been a very important issue. And I got involved with it without realizing what I got getting into. I started lending money just to protect people from loan sharks. And I was doing it from my own pocket, lending money to them, so that they don't have to go to the loan shark. And that created the whole wave of activities around it and created a bank out of it, called it Grameen Bank, and so on, lending money. And it created a lot of questions in my mind, and I raised those questions. I said, financial system is not working for poor people at all. They are nowhere near them. So here we asked some questions. What are the important issues? You gave your answers. And my experience tells me over years that finance is the economic oxygen for people. Like if you don't have oxygen in this room, we'll be gasping. We'll have a difficulty in breathing. And if you don't have oxygen in everyday life, you'll be sick, you'll be paralyzed, you can't function. So that oxygen, the financial oxygen, the economic oxygen, is not available to people. And those who are not privileged to get access to that oxygen, they remain paralyzed. And we blame them, we say they're lazy, they're not working, they're not earning their money. But we forgot that we have not provided the oxygen for which they are gasping. If we provide that oxygen, they will be just like any other active person. They will take care of themselves and contribute to the society and so on. So this is not being done with the financial institution that we have created for ourselves. This is the problem that we created. Today, Grameen Bank has become a big bank. It's nationwide. It's 9 million women receiving that finance. It's an exclusively women-focused bank. And people keep asking me questions, how did you design this bank? The others thought cannot be done. But what are the elements that you put into it? I try to think about it. What is the element that goes into that thing? And I come up with the kind of answer the way people would probably understand it easier. I said, well, I look at the conventional banks, how they do it. When I need a policy, when I need a procedure, how to do the banking, because I don't know anything about banking. So I look at the conventional banks, how they do it. Once I learn how they do it, I just do the opposite. And it works out. They go to the rich, I go to the poor. Very simple thing. And they work in the city center, I go to the remote village. They look for men, I go for women. They look for collateral. You have to have something before you get something from the bank. I said, forget it. So we don't have any collateral in our system. So we've just eliminated from the whole system. Since we don't have collateral, we don't need any legal papers. Since we don't need any legal papers, we don't have any lawyers. So we are the only bank in the world which is lawyer-free. We don't need any piece of legal paper. And we give out billions of dollars. Annually, we give out $2.5 billion in loan without any papers. And people say, you're going into big risk. I said, I never see any risk. I've been doing it for 42 years. It never failed. It works. Not only it works in Bangladesh, it works in other countries also. We have no problem there. So I challenge those things. Why the financial system has to be done in a certain way, it cannot be done other way. So we keep raising that these are the barriers which pushed all the conditionalities into a situation where the poor people cannot get into the system. So the system has been built for the privileged people. So if the banking system, the way we have that, is built for the rich people, we need a different kind of banking for the poor people because it doesn't work for that way. So we need a different kind of institution. That's a focus, that the finance cannot be just open up the door and do that because they're not built for that purpose. I said conventional banks are like super tankers. They go to the deep ocean with lots of cargoes. And that's what they do. They make big money. That's what the conventional banks do. I said, what we talk about the credit that we gave, $20, $30, $50 to people, we need the dinghy boat. We don't need super tankers. So the architecture of a super tanker, if you apply to a dinghy boat, it will never work. Dinghy boat has a separate structure, separate architecture. Once you do that, then it will work for people. This is an example. It's not just for a year, for 2 years. It's going on. It's replicated, imitated globally, and continue to do that. So the financing cannot just open up just because some policymaker said, let's open up the door for all the banks to do that. You can force the bank, the super tankers, you can force them to do that, but they cannot function it because that's not the way it has been designed. You have to design things for the appropriate purposes, for the kind of thing that you need to do. So what people raise questions that, you think poor people can take money and make a life for themselves? I said, yes, why not? If they can do that, why should you object to that? No, they are not entrepreneurs. I said, what does it mean? Oh, not everybody is an entrepreneur. I said, how do you make it out? I said, I lend money to anybody who is a poor person, who is a woman. I lend it money. I never asked, are you an entrepreneur? That question doesn't make any sense to them. So I never asked that question. I never reject anybody. So why do you say you have to do banking for the poor people by choosing entrepreneurial people? So I defied that thing. And then I came to a conclusion myself, in my own way. I said, all human beings are entrepreneurs. No exception. Simply, system has made them forget that. It's deeply buried inside of them. It's never brought out. The system told you to work for somebody else. That's why we always talk about job creation. We're not talking about entrepreneurship, because that's what we are. We are human beings, we are entrepreneurs, we are creative people, but the system is made for working for somebody else. Somebody else who? Who are we working for? Working for people who will suck up all the wealth in the world and keep it to themselves. And that's what we're working for. So we became a sort of mercenaries for those people, the people who will grab everything and make it happen. That's a system, that financial system is the vehicle through which we mop up all the wealth and take it to the top 1% who owns the 99% of the wealth today. Tomorrow, it will be worse, and continue to do that. So I came out with the idea that why not look at them as an entrepreneur, so that they can get themselves disconnected from the system to push the wealth to somebody else. I keep the wealth to myself. If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not the $2 a day workers selling the product for $5 to Europe and somebody selling it to $50, make all the money for themselves. I'm not in that system. I disconnect myself. And that's what she's trying to do, get this worker to become an independent entrepreneur. So if you can disconnect them, so the whole system has to reverse itself. If we become entrepreneurs, then I face this problem because not only we're lending money to women, we wanted to make sure their children, every children born into Grameen families, go to school. Because all of them, all 9 million of them, are illiterate. So we said, illiteracy stops here. It's our task as a bank. See, as a bank, it's our task. We defined our task to make sure their children go to school. And we made very elaborate program for that. So responsibility of every staff is to make sure the borrower, how many borrowers he or she is serving, every child in his school. That's his responsibility or her responsibility. And we made it successful. They were in school. They did continue. Some continued in higher education. We gave them education loan. Then the question came, there is no job. Again, I faced the same issue. What I faced with their mothers, I faced with their children. I said, why are you looking for jobs? I tell them that job is a very wrong idea. It's a wrong idea for the whole world. So don't get involved with that. Disconnect yourself from the job. We are not born to work for anybody else. We are born to make things happen for ourselves. We are a creative being. We do things for things that change the world. That's what we do. That's our job. So I keep telling that we are not job seekers, we are job creators. And create social business fund and invite them to come up with business ideas. And in the beginning, they say, whoa, we don't have business ideas. I said, what a shame. Your illiterate mother, 20 years back, 25 years back, when she joined Grameen Bank, she came up with an idea. And she took a big challenge of taking $30 loan and make her idea take place, materialize it, implement it. And you went to school, you got your graduation, you said you don't have an idea. I said, what good is your education if you're not even as good as your illiterate mother? So we shame them, say, if you don't know what to do, go back to your mother, learn from her, and come up with the idea. But we are standing by with money. Now they're opening up, they're coming up, hundreds of them in the beginning, a month, thousands of them now, and by the end of the year, 2,000 a month, and so on. Now we have 17,000 of these young people already in business, and the whole lineup waiting to get it done, processed, because we have the limited capacity right now. We're opening it up so that we invest in them, continue to do that. So turning unemployed young people into entrepreneurs. How? Just by financing. That's all it needed. Take one unemployed young person in Brussels. It's right here. Or your whatever home country, whatever city that you're coming from. Just think about an unemployed young person. Has brilliant business idea. He or she comes with the business idea, goes to a bank right in the city. Guess what will be the response from the bank? They probably look for the security to get him out, because that doesn't make sense to them. Why this kid wants money from us? We don't do any money for them. This is not our job. And what is collateral? That's the first question will be asked. What is his background and so on? We don't have any background check in our system. It's a human being. That person is a human being is a good enough introduction for us. We can proceed from there. That's the start we make. So the whole problem that we created with the wrong conception. Conception about financing, conception about collateral, conception about job, and we have to undo all these things so that we can undo the system that we built ourselves. Then we created other kind of thing, business. The business of making money. I said, forget it. We do business to solve problems. And we started doing that in Bangladesh. We created more than 60 such companies, and that's what Jeffrey was mentioning, and keep on adding more and more every day. We keep on creating businesses, but businesses of a very different kind. Business to solve problem. We have no intention of making money personally. It should be a sustainable business. It has enough money to earn so that it covers its costs, made a surplus. Surplus is plowed back into the system. Nobody takes any money. And we have small businesses, we have medium-sized business, we have nationwide businesses in that. And we call it social business, non-dividend company to solve human problems. That's what we do. Then we became other people became interested, big businesses became interested in the idea of social business. So they came and do partnership with us. Danone was the first one, French company, to do Grameen Danone company in Bangladesh to solve the problem of malnutrition. Malnutrition is a massive problem in Bangladesh. 48% of the children born in Bangladesh are malnourished. We can't do anything about it. We said, let's try. Create a social business. We found the yogurt as a vehicle, put all the micronutrients which are missing in the child into the yogurt. Made it a fortified yogurt, made it very cheap. Once you make it into social business, suddenly all your cost goes down. You don't need the frills, you don't need the impressive packaging or anything. Just go to the basic. And now we sell it, and children eat it. And once they eat it for 7 or 8 months, a cup a day, become a healthy child. So children love it because the taste that's put in. So this is a social business. Danone doesn't want to make money out of it as a profit. All the profit is plowed back into the system. And to give another example of that quickly, honey is a very popular thing. Everybody knows about honey, how honey is grown. We are familiar with honey in Bangladesh, familiar with honey in Albania and many other countries that we work with. But one interesting example is coming from Kampala in Uganda. What we have done in Kampala, one young person who's very passionate about honey. So he came out with the social business idea. I said he wants to make it a social business. So we discussed with him. He needs money. We provided investment from them. What he did, he trains anybody who is interested in honey. Honey growing is a very simple thing. All you have to do, know a little bit of how to maintain that boxes. And you take the box, we give him the box. He goes home and just waits for the honey to come. It's a free labor. They don't charge you anything. They come bring honey to you. All you have to do, just feed them a little bit. That's all. And then you get the honey. The trick of this business is he gives this training, he gives these boxes and makes a deal. Whatever honey you are producing, you are free to sell anywhere you want, but I give you the best price. If you want to sell it, you sell it to me. This is the price. And we share everything that we have, all the knowledge and everything. I buy your wax, I buy all the chemicals, I process everything, and I export. I have a brand name. I put a brand name on it. Now he exports in 5 European countries. He has a business of $2.5 million business already, selling this brand name. And many hundreds of thousands of people, young people, old people, in their house, they just maintain this honeybee. And it's a social business. Nobody wants to make money, but to make sure that they get the income out of it, and so on. The last one, that I, again, give an example of that,
and
is coming from...
the last one?
Yes, so it's quickly I will finish. It's a McCain, which you are familiar probably with McCain. McCain is a Canadian company, is a family-owned company. It operates in Europe. They became very interested in social business ideas, so we do joint venture business in Colombia. Now they have started joint venture with us in France on potato. 26% of the potato grown in France is thrown away. 20% thrown away, 6% remains on the ground. So what they did now is a social business. Suddenly, why are we throwing away this 20%? Why don't we collect all those? Why did they throw away? Because they are not in the shape that the machines will accept for French fries. And so this is a French fry company. So the farmers do have no way to sell it because there's tons and tons of them. So they buy this as a separate social business company, muy bien, and then they produce it as a potato soup. Soup doesn't need a shape. So it became a popular soup in France right now. Now Belgium got into it. They're producing this potato soup in Belgium. Greece is getting involved with it. Then it led them to vegetables. There's a whole 30% of vegetables grown in Europe is thrown away. What is the problem with those vegetables? They are known as ugly vegetables here in Europe because they are not the right shape. A cucumber with a fat top and the bottom is thin, nobody wants to buy it. So what this company is doing, buy up all the ugly vegetables, chop it off, and make ready-to-cook vegetables. And all the 30% is back into business. So it's not just doing business, whether it's the size is big, whether it's size is small, I'm talking about business to solve problem. That's what the SDGs are all about, it's problem. So you create social businesses with a very clear mind that this is the purpose of the business, because human beings are not just a selfish being. Human being is also selfless being. So your selflessness has to get into action. That's what the message is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, with this kind of fascinating speakers, time is not on our side, as you can imagine. But of course, I have another very, very important lady to share her thoughts with us. You all know Barbara. She's a UN in Brussels. She's a director of UNDP office in Brussels and UN Secretary General representatives toward the EU. And of course, listening to all that, it brings us back to SDGs. So what do you think development agencies, or all of us working in development, need to do in order to adjust our way of doing development business with the small and medium enterprises, and especially with the private business? So what is the UNDP recipe for that, and how we can work better?
Thank you. And before I answer directly, I perhaps want to touch on some of the issues that we've dealt with today and bringing us back to the opening. Maybe a first comment, and it's really good to see and to hear that SDGs are about real people. And I think this is what I'm hearing around this panel. It's not just some goals, 17 goals, theoretical stuff. It's about the real people, and it's about tackling with the real complex issues of the real people. And as Amina Mohamed yesterday said in her opening statements, it's about finishing off the business of the past, and it's about looking at these next steps. And she said the first 6 and the second 6. The finishing of the business in the first 6, and then in the second set is all the issues that really are the issues that are underlying conditions for the goals to be obtained. And whilst we were talking, I went back, because I don't remember them backwards, as we tried to challenge some, but I did do my homework, and I think goal 8 is really important. And I want to read it because it touches some of the issues that we've discussed. It's to promote strong, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and decent work for all. So we're talking about strong, but most of all, we're talking about inclusive. It's not any business, but it has to include the people, and it has to see it in its value chain. It has to be sustainable, and it has to be decent. So I really think it is really embedded in the goals. And goal 9 also looks at the microfinance. I think there are a couple of things there are many things that are new in this new generation, besides the fact that it's a universal agenda, as Professor Yunus was saying. It doesn't just apply to the developing world, but it applies to all of our countries too. And I think Jeff was indicating it very clearly vis-à-vis the US. But particularly in the business that we're in and development, small-scale business is very, very important. As we heard from what we saw there, a lot of the people who work in small enterprises are women. And a lot of the women of the small SMEs, which are women, tend to be in the informal sector and are both in the urban environment and in the rural environment. And a lot of the women that the Grameen Bank worked with were fundamentally poor women out of the formal sector, but who were working in agriculture and who work in some of the marginal. For us, SMEs are what we call an accelerator. So in the UN and development jargon, what does that mean? We're looking to see what are the issues that you can work with, so that when you deal with them, you have a spillover effect in different goals. Because it's a complex agenda, and our objective is within 15 years to achieve these goals, we need to identify things that if we work with them, we really have a spillover accelerating process. And we think that SMEs are those. First of all, you deal with gender issues. As we've heard, a lot of the people who work in SMEs are young, and it's a way of actually including them in the economy. Often when you provide spaces for them to work, you also have effects on the income, on the market, but also on health, on education, because women who are in those sectors, as we've also heard these days, bring their income back home, they invest in their families, they invest in their communities, as we also heard in the woman entrepreneurs. So for us, this is really a fundamental niche. But considering it has to be sustainable, and it has to be inclusive, and it has to deal with the decent work. And why and how do we do it? And maybe let's go back to the program and the project that we've discussed today. When we started talking about what we were going to do, we all use this word of extractive industries. Well, extractive industries, when you think of them, tend to be gold, petrol. You think big business, big money, and I'm going to go back to a presentation that Vivanu did some time ago, and which the numbers really struck me, and I went back to look at them. When you look at the industry of sand and gravel, we're involved in about 40 billion tons. So it's not small-scale enterprises, but big-scale production. And it produces $280 billion. That is what it represents in terms of the volume in the global economy. Whilst when we look at gold, for example, we produce 2,000 tons and 80 billion. Why was it important? Why is this development minerals important? It was of sort of saying, be careful. When we talk about the economic activities, let's not just focus on big things and think that those are the solution. Sometimes the small things are actually very important because they change, first of all, the conditions of life of the people. They change the condition of the life of the people that we are supposed to take care of, the livelihoods, but also sustainable livelihoods, and those that will actually substantively change the quality of life of the people that are involved. So the first thing that the UN does is, and particularly sort of the development agencies, is make sure that we don't lose these issues, the focus of these issues, and we address them. And actually, when we talk about working with gender, that's exactly it. How do we make invisible people visible? And how do we make sure that there is investment in the sectors that they are involved? Particularly because, as Professor Yunus was saying, this actually produces well-being. For the community, it also produces income, because if it is correctly done, it also changes the situation. What do we also do? We try and connect the dots. So, for example, as we walk out of this panel today, we're going to go and sign a memorandum of understanding with the African Guarantee Fund, because we've realized that one of the constraints, and you heard it from the woman, that they have is microfinance. So, because unfortunately we don't have Grameen banks everywhere, and I wish we did, we need to make sure that the formal sector associates itself, understands the needs of these, and gets over their scare of investing in them. And so what we're wanting to do with the Guarantee Fund is make sure that the banks feel comfortable working with this sector, and also accompany with capacity building. And it's so, therefore, the link with helping link up these small-scale businesses, making them visible, connecting them to the sources of funding, accompanying the process, and ensuring this connection with the private-public connection in this process. We need to make sure that there is a public-private dialogue around the sector and the great potential that it has, and then make sure that we support it. In addition to that, the UN, are also, and in this case specifically UNDP, working with the global spheres. We have a center in Istanbul who is making sure that we have the knowledge, that we make sure that the knowledge reaches the actors, and that we can experiment specific initiatives with the global projects in specific countries. So we have a program called the Business Call for Action, and that is of making sure that the different actors are involved and they implement it. We have a Connecting Business initiative, which does the same thing, and specifically centered on the inclusive business, small-scale business environment. And then we work with actors such as the G20. We have a platform for inclusive business that we are operating with other actors and with donor funding, where we try and influence the G20 thinking and getting them involved also in making all of this visible, but also investing. So we have web pages that are available, where information is accessible, where guidelines are available, so that the national actors get involved. So probably in a sum, if I was to say what does and then we work with our partners. UNCDF is part of the UN family that specializes in microfinance. The World Bank is a very important actor that we have. We work very closely with the EU. So we try and mobilize the international community, each one from its different perspectives and level of knowledge, to make sure that we move forward. I don't want to end before mentioning the informal sector, because I think we need to be aware, and we are all committed to making sure that the people working in the informal sector pass from the informality to the formality, because this is where each one of us also wants to be there. But we need to be aware that the informal sector in many of these countries represents 30% of the GDP and 70% of the people employment. And so we need to make sure that whilst we help them transition towards the formal sector, that they are actually taken into account, that they are also visible, that they have access to microfinance, that they have access to the markets, and that we accompany the process, because that's where the women are, and that's where the vulnerable families are, and that is where a lot of the people who we think are this creative texture in society can actually contribute from. And we are very, very much committed to doing that, and I hope in partnership with all of you. So I would close off by saying that it's actually fantastic that we're discussing this today. As UNDP, I'd like to thank all the actors for associating it, because it's really bringing down the issue that this is about people, but it's not just because we're nice. It's because these are people who are the tissue of our society, who are the ones that the SDGs were built with and for. We just need to make sure that they are part of our day-to-day work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. As I said, time for our session is gone, but with your permission, dear audience, I would still ask 2 questions from the iPad that they had given to me, that apparently came from you. First one, I would like to ask Professors Yunus and Sag, and basically the question is, when you were to establish your bank and your Millennium Villages project again, what would you have done differently, and what would you do to put the SDGs in the center of your businesses? And then for other 4 speakers, the question would be, how can we do to help the SMEs that they do present more or less 50% of the businesses in our partner countries without losing the essence of the small businesses. I would like to ask you 1 minute each, and then we will need to close down the session, and I would like to thank you all for your contribution. So please, first, Professors Sachs and Professor Yunus.
Okay, let me go. What I would do probably, it's always step by step. I had no idea what I will do next. It was not pre-planned, there was no blueprint. It's a learn from each step and take the next step. But looking back, if I have to do it in the hindsight that we had, we were trying to protect ourselves from foreign aid so that I don't have to take any foreign aid. So right from the beginning, we want to make sure it's all done based in Bangladesh, nothing else. We can do it ourselves. Now, when we became a bank, it opened up the door for us. We can take deposit and can lend money. But there's so much pressure from international community to take the money. So the pressure came to the government, and the government started saying that, why didn't you take the money? Because it helps us, because it's a foreign currency. I said, Grameen Bank doesn't need any foreign currency. All we need is a local taka, and we have local taka is available, so no problem. I said, no, we need the foreign, government said we need the foreign currency. So under pressure, we agreed. Okay, you take this money. So opened it up. And it started in 1983, foreign aid. And then after a while, we started thinking, why are we taking all this money? In the meantime, lots of other pressure came. We give you $100 million, we give you $200 million. We said, we don't need money. They go and pressure the government that we want to give the money, he doesn't want the money. So the government puts the pressure. So at one point in 1990, we decided that we don't want to take any foreign money because it keeps on pressuring us to take the money. Here is plenty of money for us. And we decided from now on, we'll not take any money at all. Government put lots of pressure on us, but we never budged on that. So we continue to be reviving that ourselves. There's plenty of deposits money coming in. Today, as I mentioned, we give $2.5 billion a year. All the money comes from our deposits. But the interesting that happened last year, the total deposit of the borrowers themselves, you're talking about the financing. This is one example of financing. It's self-financing. The total deposits of the borrowers in their own savings account exceeded the total outstanding of the bank. Total outstanding of the bank is $1.5 billion. They have nearly $2 billion in deposits. So I kept the staff of the banks. I said, don't call them borrowers anymore because they are the lenders. You are the borrower because they gave you more money than you gave them. So this is the complete change. So it's not the shortage of money. It's a question of how you design your things. So that's one lesson. I wish I could, right from the beginning, I stayed out not to take any foreign money.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
During a 10-year period, the Millennium Villages Project worked with what we called clusters of villages, around 40 to 50,000 people in 10 countries with a focus on rural poverty. And what we learned is, very importantly, that systems like low-cost healthcare, low-cost education, clean water and sanitation, off-grid energy are all available to provide important pathways out of poverty. I also think it's important to emphasize that there are real difficulties ahead and no simple shortcuts. People without education and without the skills that come with education are not going to make it out of poverty, no matter what kind of organizational structure or invention one has. And I think it's also very important to stress in at least our experience in rural Africa, if you are a smallholder where the farm size is already down to a half a hectare, sometimes even smaller, it's almost impossible at that small scale to find a way that is viable, except in very small niches of agriculture. So that means a lot of people are not in viable circumstances, in my view. It's not a matter just of being clever. It's a matter of really tough person-to-land ratios right now. The fast rising population in rural Africa is not a friend of development. I don't like the slogans that there's no problem with this. There are serious problems, in my opinion, with this. We're going to see a lot of urbanization as a result, and preparing for urban-based jobs and skills is essential. I personally think that everything we heard is very important and very good. Ethical consumption, social business, microfinance, but also development assistance. We're not in a position of luxury to say, well, that one is no longer needed, that one is no longer needed. We're really still fighting some very, very tough battles, and development finance is a measure of basic decency. My country, not so decent right now at the top, actually filled with decent people, just a weirdo as president. But for the rest of, and especially for Europe, don't fall prey to the rhetoric that we're post-development aid levels. Europe's not doing enough. It's doing more than anybody else, but not enough. And there's too much sloganeering and too much happy talk, and we've got some very major struggles and challenges ahead still. That's my view.
Yeah. Thank you very much for reminding us as well that Europe is doing a lot. We even increased last year for 11% our contribution, so to 75.5 billion, and we clearly are committed to do more, but we, as I said before, know that only the traditional finance alone will not do the trick to implement the SDG. And that's why we do believe that the working with private sector and scaling and leveraging our aid may basically bring even additional results. So this is the message that I wanted to share. And also in our external investment plan, hopefully we will create the SMEs window that will also create the possibilities and conditions for small businesses to thrive further. But now the last word goes to my four speakers, reminding four speakers. I will not make other conclusion than saying that this discussion needs to be continued, because there are plenty of questions and plenty of unanswered questions that we need to address. So please, let's go first to Barbara and then to three others, but shortly, because I see that the audience is leaving us slowly but surely. And thank you very much to everyone. Barbara?
Thank you. You know, I'm Italian, and every time we talk about the development model of Italy, it's around the small and middle scale enterprises. And this has been the essence of the development of my country. And I've lived overseas and worked in development now for 27 years. In all the countries I go to, it really is a motor. Of course, it's a motor, as Jeff was saying, that doesn't go along on its own. It needs supports, it needs to be accompanied, it needs public sector to understand the needs and to give the means to do it. And usually it just gets better, it doesn't disappear. It's because the people who are involved, it's in their communities, in the areas they're in, they progressively specialize, but they do maintain their essence of small and medium scale. And then usually when we talk about small and medium scale, we're talking about family managed enterprises where you're talking about 20 people, and it's usually very, very effective. And what we find is that those people who work in these areas then invest in their children and hopefully maintain them and give them opportunities. So for me, this is a fundamental conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Please, Mrs. Avar, to you.
If I talk about SMEs, the small, medium enterprises, I would like to say while starting a startup, we should ask ourselves that which particular SDG are we addressing. For example, when we get into a university, we choose departments. Do we want to study in engineering? Do we want to study business administration? Maybe while starting a startup, we should ask which SDG should be our focus in the journey. For me, I think SDG 8, the inclusion, is very important, because if we make inclusive society, that actually enforces a better income, and that helps the society to have, a society without poverty, with better food, with more renewable energy. So that should be the start. When we start the business, we sustain the essence of the SME, but we also include the SDGs in the process of taking it forward.
Thank you very much. And to Felix.
I'll be very short, and to see that if you really want to achieve your SDG objective, it's important that we really rationalize the way we use the source of financing. As Professor Yunus said, financing is the oxygen of our business. And Professor Sachs also said we need the two types of financing, private and public. But we need to specialize more of the public one to enable the environment. I was saying infrastructure, access to market, business environment are key to give the appropriate comfort to the private financing to join. Without that, we cannot do anything. For me, it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, to finish, certainly we need to harness the potential of the SMEs without disturbing what they are. I think that's what you want us to say. For me, it's simple. We just need to connect to the market, to the global value chains, but at the right level. Now most of them, we're talking about small farmers. Small farmers are connected to the international market, but not at the appropriate level. Their contribution is too low in the system. We need to do the same for the SMEs, make sure that where they are supported to contribute, this is done in relation with the market. What are they contributing? We say we are producing to respond to the need. We're not just producing for the sake of producing. You're producing something, you are bringing something to the market, but you need to understand the market and to make sure that then, as SMEs, your role will be recognized, and those who are at the end, up downstream in the system, they'll also know that these SMEs at the level where they are, they can contribute, and that's where we have to support them there. Not elsewhere, but where they are, so they can keep doing what they are doing and do it properly to respond to the market needs.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to you, audience, for staying with us 20 minutes longer. That means that the discussion was really good. Thank you very much.